Give it a like and subscribe now. Before you fall asleep, you definitely won't regret it. This case took place in the United States of America, in a small rural town called Richwood, located in Washington County, Missouri. It was there that one of the heroes of today's case lived, Sean Hornbeck, a cheerful boy born on July 17th, 1991. By the year 2002, Sean was still living in a small and quiet Midwestern town with his mother, Pam Akers, and her husband, Craig Akers, and older sisters, Jackie and Jennifer. It's worth noting that Craig was not the biological father of Pam's children, but he was the kind of father who gave affection, care, and attention. Sean's mother had divorced a few years earlier and later married Craig. The boy and his stepfather developed a special, warm, and trusting relationship. Sean always perceived the man as his own father. In his 11 years, young Hornbeck was a good student. He was in the 5th grade of elementary school, liked to spend time with friends, and a special place in his heart was baseball. In short, he was just an ordinary kid from a good family living in a quiet town. However, bad things often happen to good people. No one could have imagined that it would happen to this family on Sunday, October 6, 2002. It was an ordinary day. A boy was bored, so he asked his parents for permission to go to a friend's house to play. There was nothing unusual about it. Sean had done it dozens of times before. His parents didn't say no, so he went. They did say he had to be home by 5 to have dinner with them. The boy said goodbye to his parents, and then took his bike and set off to find something to do. Around 5 o'clock, Pam and Craig started to worry that their son might not make it home in time for dinner. At first, they didn't think much of it, since tardiness was a common occurrence for kids. But as the minutes went by, the boy still wasn't home. Finally, the Akers decided to call the parents of Sean's friend, to whom he was going. The info they got on the phone made them numb. It turned out that their son never made it to his destination. The boy's parents tried to keep it together. They thought maybe their kid had changed his mind and gone to hang out with someone else. They started calling all the people Sean knew, but no one had any idea where he was. Meanwhile, night had fallen. Since Sean was afraid of the dark, Pam and Craig reported their son missing to the police right away. Local authorities then contacted the National Center for Missing Children and reported the incident to other agencies. Soon after, the cops, with the help of FBI agents, started looking for the missing kid. Neighbors, friends, and concerned citizens also organized a bunch of volunteer search parties, which immediately started scouring both the neighborhood and the road the boy might have taken. They were eager to find Sean ASAP, or at the very least, find any clues that might shed light on what had happened to him. Investigators started talking to local residents who lived on the possible route of the child. They found out that several people saw Sean riding his bike near the school. According to the people they talked to, who knew the boy well, he met one of his older sisters and her friend. He chatted with the girls for a bit, and then took off. Apparently, he pulled onto the road and drove near the local Catholic church. Other people said they saw the boy turn onto a dirt road that apparently led to his friend's house. This helped the authorities figure out where the missing man was last seen. Since then, there's been nothing more about Sean's whereabouts. After 3 days of scouring the city's neighborhoods and wooded areas, and after mapping out Sean's possible route, flyers with his picture and info continued to circulate. They described him as a 5th grade student, about 4'10" tall, and weighing around 40 kilograms. He had brown eyes and blonde hair, last seen wearing an orange t-shirt and blue jeans. They said Sean was traveling on a green mountain bike. The police started checking all the offenders in the area to see if they could find the teenager. They were mostly interested in people with a history of kidnapping and solicitation of minors. At the same time, the authorities started getting a bunch of different stories about where the missing boy might be. One of them was about a car accident that happened the day before the boy went missing, but when they looked into it, they found out it was a dog, not a kid, that got hurt in the accident. Over the next few months, the authorities checked all the info they got, no matter how out there it was. For example, some people thought the boy's disappearance could be related to illegal drugs. Like, maybe the kid found a lab where they were made, or maybe someone kidnapped him to mess with a batch of illegal drugs. But these ideas didn't pan out. They sent groups of sniffer dogs over and over to search for traces of Sean in the area where he went missing. One of the dogs pointed to a spot by a nearby lake where the kid might be. The Police then brought in divers to help look for the teenager. They used underwater cameras to survey the lake a bunch of times, but they didn't find any remains at the bottom. Since this was the only spot that the bloodhounds had marked, Sean's parents didn't want to stop searching, so the authorities decided to drain the lake. This took about 3 days, but they didn't find anything. After that, Pam and Craig kept searching for their son in every way they could. They made new flyers, and they even started a website and a foundation in Sean Hornbeck's name to spread and collect info about their son's disappearance. The Akers also gave lots of interviews to different news outlets that wanted to cover the case. But even after all that, they still didn't have any solid leads. Time was running out, and the authorities were running out of energy. Then, a strange guy named Lou showed up. He's a reclusive hermit who lives in the woods, and he told the cops about a dream he had. In the dream, he saw a child. They questioned Lou a lot, and some of what he said was confirmed, but it turned out there was no truth to it. They couldn't connect him to the kidnapping, and eventually he was taken off the list of informants, leaving him on the list of people who were interesting to the investigation. As time went on, no new leads emerged. So, the investigation pretty much stalled. Sean's family, for their part, did everything they could to keep the case alive. They kept showing up to different television shows, some of which were, let's say, not exactly top-notch. One of the guests on one of these shows said that Sean was dead. He gave a few details about where the kid's body was supposed to be, but that turned out to be wrong. The Akers got a lot of support from friends and regular people in the area. This helped them pay for billboards. Pam and Craig also hired private investigators, spending all their savings. Unfortunately, almost all the measures taken proved ineffective. It had been over 4 years since Sean went missing, when another little boy went missing in Missouri, just 72 kilometers from the Akers family's home. His name was Ben Ownby. He was a nice, smiling young man of 13. He went missing on the 8th of January 2007 in a town called Beaufort, Franklin County, after getting home from school. His dad came home that afternoon. As usual, he expected to find his son playing on the computer. But this day was different. Ben wasn't home, and there was no sign that he'd come home from school. Don, the boy's dad, immediately called his wife to see if she had any idea where their son might have been. The woman said no. So Don went to the school, thinking maybe his son was there for a sporting or social event in the afternoon. But this turned out not to be the case. All the kids left the school at the same time as usual, and none of them missed the bus. After hearing this, Don started to worry about his son. He went home and asked the parents of other kids in the neighborhood if any of them had seen Ben. Luckily, Don was able to chat with 15-year-old Mitchell Hulse, who was also heading home on the same bus as his son. Mitchell said he and Ben got off the bus and went their separate ways. Then the boy said that he noticed a white minibus slowly heading in the same direction as Ben. When the missing boy's father heard this, he immediately called the emergency number. The cops started looking into it right away. They knew that in cases of child abduction, the first hours of the search are especially important. So, the detectives called in some agents from the FBI who've worked on cases like this before. At the same time, local authorities started handing out flyers with Ben's picture all over the city. They said the missing boy was about 4'10" and about 45 kilograms. He had blue eyes, brown hair, and glasses. When he went missing, he was wearing a hooded shirt and pants. Overall, there weren't many leads, just info from Mitchell about the white van. The cops talked to the young man, and he said he'd seen a Nissan van that looked unusual for the area. He said the van was following Ben. He also said the car had a rusty fender on the passenger side, a bulging rear window, a trailer hitch, and dents on the doors. The boyfriend was able to describe the car pretty well, but unfortunately, he didn't remember any license plate numbers or the driver's exterior characteristics. At first, investigators thought it was weird that the witness could remember and describe so many details about the alleged kidnapper's car. They even thought maybe he was just trying to draw attention to himself. So, they offered him a lie detector test. Mitchell was all for it and aced the test. When the cops asked him how he could remember so much, he said he'd always been into those kinds of cars. The cops then scoured the area where the kidnapping happened for any clue. They also handed out flyers with info about Ben's disappearance and the car's characteristics to other cops and the public. For their part, the forensic officers went to the place where, according to the only witness, the wanted minibus had been seen. There, they were able to get tire impressions from 2 types of tires, both of which matched the vehicle that had been described. In the course of their investigative work, the police found certain similarities between Ben's abduction and Sean's disappearance, without trace, which had occurred more than 4 years earlier. The boys were roughly the same age, had similar physiological typologies, and, in addition, the disappearances had occurred relatively close to each other. There was an important difference, however, and that was the presence of a witness who provided significant information about the alleged abductor's vehicle. As a result, all of the information Mitchell provided was widely disseminated. Posters were put up all over the city. At the same time, law enforcement officers set up numerous roadblocks in hopes of finding the vehicle in question. After some time, investigators came to the conclusion that the car of Lou, the man who claimed to have dreamed of similar kidnappings of Sean, matched the wanted vehicle in a number of respects. Thus, police officers again questioned the suspicious man, and this time definitively ruled him out as being connected to the case. All this work definitely paid off, and the perpetrator's vehicle was eventually located. At the moment, there are several versions of how it happened. 2 cops came to the apartment complex to serve a summons and saw a car in the parking lot that matched the description in the orientation report. So, the cops decided to check out the van. A few minutes later, a guy named Michael Devlin approached them and said he owned the Nissan. The cops checked and found that the car was really his. Then they asked him if he knew about the kidnapping of a kid named Ben. He said he did. The cops then asked Michael to take them to his apartment, and his demeanor changed. He refused to go with them and hurried back to his house. After a while, FBI agents came to his doorstep, but Michael made it clear that he didn't have anything to do with Ben's kidnapping and wouldn't let them in. The police got a search warrant pretty quickly because of how weird Michael was acting. The second version is that the owner of the pizzeria where Michael worked noticed some similarities between his employee's car and the one the police were looking for, related to the alleged kidnapping of the child. So, the guy called the authorities, and one day the FBI came to the place to talk to the suspect. During the interview, Michael was so nervous that he just couldn't focus on the questions. When they asked about Ben's abduction, he said there had been some confusion. He said his godson Sean was staying with him, but he didn't know anything about Ben. The FBI interrogator noticed that Michael's pulse quickened, and one of his veins swelled when he mentioned Sean's name. After a moment, he had the scary thought that the man he was interrogating might be referring to the same Sean, the first missing child. So, the agent decided to spook an already scared Michael, and told him that he had tire samples of the car Ben had been abducted in. At this point, the agent realized he'd been caught in his lie and lowered his head. He then said that he knew he was a bad man. Then the agent asked if the abductee was in his apartment right now. The man said yes. After the interview, the cops, along with folks from other agencies, went to the apartment complex where Michael lived. As soon as they unlocked the door, little Ben ran out of the apartment. At the same time, an older teenager was sitting on the couch in the living room. The officer went up to him and asked his name. The young man replied, Sean Hornbeck. The officer let him know he was safe and would be taken home soon. Michael's apartment was a mess, and it was filthy. It also had several guns. While some cops were doing a room-by-room inspection, others took the boys to the FBI unit and got their parents on the phone. The Akers were driving the car when a call came in on Pam's cell phone. The woman picked up the phone pretty quickly, but as soon as she heard the agent's voice, she immediately handed the phone to her husband. Craig said he'll never forget the short phrase he heard. This put an end to a nightmare for their family that had lasted more than 4 years. Meanwhile, word spread fast that the missing young men had been reunited with their families. On the 12th of January, 2007, the Franklin County Sheriff's Office shared some welcome news that was also, honestly, a bit hard to believe. First, he said that 13-year-old Ben, who'd been kidnapped 4 days earlier, had been found safe. Then the local law enforcement rep also mentioned Sean, the boy who'd been kidnapped more than 4 years earlier. The sheriff said that the authorities were able to catch the kidnapper. The media dubbed the case a Missouri miracle. It's no secret that criminals can be divided into different categories. First, there are those who are born with it. Then, there are those who become it. So, who was the guy who kidnapped the boys? So, Who was Michael Devlin? We know he was adopted and grew up in a large foster home in Webster Groves, Missouri. According to some of the people who knew him, he was a friendly and outgoing person until he got diabetes. The disease got complicated, and he had to get a few toes amputated. Those who knew him back then say that this changed his personality and behavior. So, when he was arrested, Devlin was a 41-year-old recluse who was moody and grumpy. He worked as a manager at a pizzeria. He seemed like a regular guy, always paid his bills on time, and got along with everyone. For years, he'd been trying to suppress his dark, perverted fantasies and desires for teenagers. But he knew he couldn't hold them in forever. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. On Sunday, the 6th of October, 2002, Michael went out hunting to satisfy his needs. That day, he was lucky enough to spot a lone boy riding his bike on a dirt road. That boy was Sean Hornbeck. He was so busy riding his bike that he didn't notice the van that pulled up behind him. The man crashed into the teenager, and the teenager was thrown to the side of the road with his bike. After checking that the boy wasn't hurt, Devlin tied his hands and put him in the back of his car. At this point, Hornbeck came to his senses. He asked Michael what was going on and why he was doing this. Michael just said, "You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time." According to the teenager's account, for the first month of his confinement, Michael kept him tied up and completely immobilized. When the man went to work, he gagged him to intimidate Sean and discourage any thought of escape. And he showed him samples of firearms and threatened to take his life if he tried to escape or call for help. In the first days after the abduction, Devlin reportedly regularly went home from work on the grounds that he needed to give medicine to his cat. But really, he was checking to see if Sean was still in the same place. After Sean was released, investigators and the public speculated a lot about whether he had voluntarily stayed at Michael's house. For example, when the cops went into Devlin's apartment, the 15-year-old was just sitting on the couch playing video games. There weren't any security measures in the kidnapper's apartment that could have stopped Sean from escaping. So why didn't he just escape? We found out later when the captive started talking. He said that after a month, Michael tried to get rid of him for security reasons. At that moment, Sean's survival instincts kicked in, and he tried to bargain his way out of the situation. In the end, he succeeded. The teenager promised he'd never try to escape and wouldn't give Michael up if Michael let him stay alive. Devlin agreed, letting Hornbeck know that he'd kill him the first time he suspected an escape. He said that he'd also kill all of Michael's family if Michael tried to escape. So, Sean basically made a deal with the devil. The next few months went by, and Sean was stuck in complete isolation. Little by little, Michael made sure that Sean wouldn't try to escape. It was clear that Sean was scared for himself and his family. For starters, he didn't know where he'd go if he tried to escape. Sean basically had no other choice. Soon, Devlin started giving him some perks. For example, Sean could talk to a neighbor kid. He told the neighbor kid that Michael was his dad and that his mom had died in a car accident. He also told him that he didn't go to school because he was homeschooled. Over time, the man started giving his captive various gifts, starting with a bike, then a game console, and eventually, a modern cell phone. He'd regularly leave the house and walk with his neighbor, which worked in Michael's favor. With how much freedom the boy had, no one would have thought he was kidnapped. Sean said that one day, when he was over at his neighbor's place, they showed a report about him on television. His friend said he looked a lot like him, and Sean, stammering, said he wasn't. Over the years, Sean had a bunch of run-ins with the cops. The first time was when he got his bike stolen. And the second time was when the cops gave him a warning for riding his bike late at night. So, none of the cops recognized him or helped him. There was also this other time when Sean left a message on a website his parents set up to find him. He posted a question, "How long will you continue to search for your son?" and even signed his name. But no one paid any attention. Then, in 2007, a turning point happened. Sean turned 15, and Michael started thinking that the teenager was too old for him. So Devlin decided to find a replacement for him and commit another kidnapping of a child. This time the man forced the young man to help him and become his accomplice. It was another way of silencing Hornbeck. The fact that he was even there when it happened made him an accomplice. If the boy decided to turn on Michael, he'd be held responsible for what he'd done. Everything turned out exactly as Devlin had planned. On the day Ben was kidnapped, Sean was in the passenger seat of his van. A few days after his rescue, Hornbeck, with his mom and stepdad, showed up to a press conference set up in a local school's auditorium near his hometown. Even though the kid didn't speak to the journalist himself, his mere presence made everyone there happy. During the event, he was wearing a simple blue tracksuit and sat next to his mom, hugging her tightly. His mom, Pam, said he still felt like he was in a dream, but this time it was a good one. After that, the Akers went to a bunch of television shows, including Oprah's. Sean didn't really talk about what he went through for most of the shows, though. He tried to focus the audience on what he thought was most important. He told his family members who had lost loved ones not to give up looking for them, and he encouraged victims of kidnapping to keep fighting and not give up hope. Now that the kidnapping victims had been rescued and returned to their families, it was up to the authorities to hold Michael Devlin accountable for his awful actions. During his trial, the offender was charged with 1 count of kidnapping in Franklin County and 1 count of kidnapping and criminal trespass in Washington County. At his first court appearance, Michael pleaded not guilty, even though he had previously confessed to the prosecutor. But the evidence against him was so overwhelming that it didn't matter. After the first court meeting, they extended the man's arrest and set his bail at $40 million. A few days later, Michael's situation took a turn for the worse. The St. Louis County District Attorney added 71 more counts, for a total of 81. 18 of these counts were for Ben's kidnapping, and the other 17 were for unlawful acts related to his personal life. Sean's kidnapping indictment had 53 counts, but only 1 of those was directly related to the kidnapping. Each of the 71 counts could have led to life in prison. They also added other counts related to illegally possessing guns. By October 2007, it was known that Michael Devlin had formally pleaded guilty to all charges in 3 jurisdictions. He reportedly detailed all the horrors that Sean Hornbeck and Ben Ownby had to endure. You can find all these details on my Boosty if you follow the link in the description, as I can't post such content on YouTube. After all the trials against Michael, he was sentenced to dozens of life sentences. On the 30th of January 2008, he started serving his first life sentence, which would last 2 decades. In total, Devlin was set to serve a record 2,020 years. So, he was never going to be a free man again. He was locked up in a correctional center in Cameron, Missouri. In March 2008, he was interviewed by agents from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and a Maryland State Police investigator. These experts were trying to understand the motivation and thought patterns of criminals like Michael Devlin, so they could train officers from different law enforcement agencies to track them down and identify them early on. They spent a lot of time getting ready for the interview, looking for different ways to get Michael to open up, but he wasn't really interested. The interview lasted several hours, and Michael was encouraged to think about his life and thoughts. He was curious about why he'd committed those crimes, and he said he'd struggled with his attraction to teenagers for years. When the FBI agents asked him to define his orientation, he answered in 1 word: sick. He said he had a happy childhood, even though he was raised in foster care. Unlike most offenders, he wasn't physically abused or forced into intimacy by anyone. He said that around age 13, he realized he was into boys, not guys. He tried to make a friend do that with him once, but it didn't work. So he tried to forget about it. He ate a lot, like almost 140 pounds. He also mentioned that he was a compulsive cleaner and gamer, and he avoided his kids, family, and friends. He even tried to date adult men a few times, but he said they never satisfied him. He said he struggled with his needs until they took control of him. He didn't have the communication skills to trick the victim, so he went for a kidnapping instead. A short time later, he found Sean, and he said that if the authorities hadn't caught him, he would have kept going. On the 9th of April, 2011, during breakfast at the prison, Michael was stabbed multiple times by another inmate. The guy, who was also serving a life sentence, made a knife out of metal typewriter rails. He said he attacked Michael because of the severity of his crimes against children. Devlin wasn't seriously hurt and was returned to his cell after receiving medical attention. After this incident, local authorities decided to consider transferring the child abductor to another correctional facility outside the state of Missouri. They even talked about changing his name, but the families of the victims learned about it and were against it. So, he stayed in the same place, but they put him in a solitary cell. Later on, Devlin started suffering from severe depression. He stopped taking his meds and said he didn't want to live anymore. As of the latest update on the 22nd of March, 2022, Michael is still alive. Sean Hornbeck was able to get his life back on track, even though it seemed impossible at first. He didn't start talking about what he went through until 2 years after he was rescued. When he was abducted, he was in the 5th grade. He didn't get the chance to finish school during the 4 years he was held captive. But Sean was determined to catch up, and within a year, he had caught up with his peers. He studied hard and got into sports, and he was a regular guest on different television shows. Sean always said that the authorities should make the public aware of any strange people near us. At this time, some disturbing info came out about Sean's dad. It turns out the guy had a similar conviction to Michael Devlin's, and according to the case file, it was about a minor victim. Then, on the 15th of July, 2019, Sean's stepdad, Craig, passed away. The man had been diagnosed with bladder cancer. He was buried in the National Cemetery with full military honors because he was in the U.S., Air Force, and also the Patriot Guard. The Sean Hornbeck Foundation, which his parents started, closed in 2013 because they didn't have the money or time. But the members kept the cause going and started a search and rescue squad called the Missouri Valley Search and Rescue Squad. The detectives investigating the case admitted that it wouldn't have been solved without the witness, Mitchell Hulse. He remembered a suspicious van after Ben's abduction, and both the local community and the FBI praised him. The FBI hoped that as the young man grew older, he would consider a career in law enforcement. Unfortunately, there's no info about whether or not he did that. But we do know that in 2007, a car dealership in St. Louis gave him a pickup truck as a reward for helping to find kidnapping victims.
我有我自己的原则，我不想一辈子让人踩在脚下。你以为我是臭要饭的？